Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the last of our CEPSAM seminars. We're really excited to have you all with us today. Just gonna give a few more minutes for everyone to join us. Okay, so for the presentation today, I'd just like to remind everyone to keep their mics off for the duration of the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can put your questions to Iraide at the Q&A session at the end. Alternatively, you might want to use the raise hand function and then we'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question orally. Okay, so today's presentation on metaphors Spanish speakers live by is by Prof. Iraide Ibarretxe-Antuñano, and she is Professor of General Linguistics at the University of Zaragoza and researcher at the Institute for Heritage and Humanities, also at Zaragoza. She's also an elected fellow of the Academia Europaea in the linguistics section. She holds a degree in English philology from the University of Deusto and a PhD in linguistics from the University of Edinburgh. She's been a postdoctoral research fellow with funds from the Basque government at the University of California in Berkeley and at the University of Deusto. She's also been an invited research fellow at the International Computer Science Institute in Berkeley, at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics in Mechelen in Holland, the University of Concepcion, Chile, UC Berkeley, and Lund University in Sweden. Her research focuses on the relationship between language, cognition, and communication from a typological and psycholinguistic perspective. And she's extensively published on topics related to semantic typology, such as lexicalization and polysemy, on ideophones and sound symbolism, and the relationship between metaphor, embodiment, and culture. Among her latest publications are Cognitive Linguistics and Translation, 2013, Space and Motion Across Languages, 2017, and Lingüística Cognitiva y Español, 2019. Together with Javier Valenzuela, she directed the handbook Lingüística Cognitiva in 2012 and wrote the monograph Lenguaje y Cognición, which is out this year. So without further ado, I will pass over to you, Iraide.
Well, thank you very much for both inviting me to be here at Swansea University at these seminars that you are organizing around, Portugal, Spain, and the Americas. And while I give you my thanks also for being here today, I'm going to start sharing my screen. I think it's okay. Let me see. Okay, can you? All right. So yes, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to come today to talk to you about metaphors in general. And as the title says, which is a quite pretentious title, just using Lakoff and Johnson's first main book on conceptual metaphor, Metaphors We Live By. The title I gave is Metaphors Spanish Speakers Live By. So this talk is going to go around the concept of metaphor and how we can use it cross-linguistically with a special focus on Spanish as a native language and also as a second language. So first of all, I always like to do something, and this is, if you have time, this is a cue. You don't need to do it. This is a small test. I'm going to show you today well-established research and results on metaphor, but also a couple of studies, ongoing studies that my team and we are all doing at Zaragoza and at different universities. So this one, if you want to participate, all registered participants actually got the link. It's a small test. It's on the COVID Press and Cover Press, and it would take you just a couple of minutes to fill in it if you want to. Because afterwards, during the talk, I will talk about some results from this same test. Okay, so now to talk. Well, the big question, this is something very, I find it's kind of difficult to answer in just a talk. It's what is a metaphor? And I'm saying this because metaphor, it's a topic, let's say that for the moment, that has been researched for a very, very long time, and from many different disciplines, from philosophy to translation, or to almost any field in academia. So every time I give a talk on a metaphor, and this week this is the second one I give, so I'm going to use some slides I used in my previous talk. I always start with this question, what is metaphor? And in order to answer that, I always go back to, different dictionaries, what the dictionaries say. Being a semanticist as myself, I like dictionaries, but I also like to show, especially when I talk to my students, that dictionaries do not tell the truth and all the truth, okay? But anyway, this is what I found at the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, and I want to invite you to read this definition, but especially to pay attention to these two key aspects in this definition. They say that metaphor is a word or phrase and different from its normal use, and they say this very powerful. We are using it because it's very powerful. Here, I want to make you a question. Ask yourselves what normal use is, okay? Because I always find these really abstract definitions, normal use. What is normal use? And if you work in corpus linguistics, you might have an answer, but otherwise it's very difficult to describe what a normal use is in general. Okay, so let's go to another one. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And here we find similar elements. Again, we see here word and phrase. But here I want you to pay attention to these three words. It is a figure of speech. And this is something that many dictionaries in different languages actually use, figure of speech. If you go to Wikipedia, and this is something that we all do, some things to see, at least to have a first look at a certain concept. Again, we have, figure of speech there, but then in this definition, I want you to look at two more elements, or two more characteristics or features of metaphor. Rhetorical effect, and if you know rhetorical, it means, to make speech more beautiful or more powerful. It's that kind of, extra added value, for a normal test. And there is another bit I like you to pay attention to is in the second line, this obscure or clarity. Okay, here it's a word that sometimes comes up in different dictionaries. This obscure or clear. If you want to be clear, you don't use metaphors. If you want to be obscure, you use metaphors. The funny thing is that here in this normal use or in this obscure or clarity, they are already using metaphors. So maybe if they want to be clear and be good at describing a concept, maybe they should avoid metaphors, at least what they say in their own definitions. In summary, in many of these definitions in dictionaries and in different works about metaphor, these are the main characteristics I think that we all learn from school about metaphor. It's a matter of words, and this is to say that it's a linguistic phenomenon. Later on, we will talk about all these characteristics. It has a rhetorical purpose or an artistic purpose. That means not for everyday life communication. It's based on physical similarity and identification. It's just on purpose, unconsciously, to give all this glow, of beauty and power. And of course, if you want to do that, if you want to be effective, that means that talent is required. Not everybody can actually use metaphor and produce metaphors. And again, in order to avoid this obscureness, you can speak without metaphors. Okay, so metaphor-free speech is what you want. This is more or less the characteristics that we can extract from all these, let's call dictionaries and traditional works on metaphor. And this is not what I show about these dictionaries in English are no exception. This is the Spanish main dictionary from the Royal Academy of the Spanish language, and they also use exactly the same type of definition. They are even more metaphorical here, because if you see this sentido recto, it means the right sense, more or less, similar to the normal, but this is another metaphor. Right is the good one, whereas the distorted meaning is the bad one. Okay, so this is more or less what we find about metaphor in these, let's say, general sources, when you go to see and learn more about what metaphor is. Okay, but the question I always do when I present these definitions is that, do you think really this is what metaphor is, or this is only what metaphor is? And okay, if it is so, why we have all these expressions? And here I will always use the two languages, okay, English and Spanish. So why can't we see clear ideas? We saw this obscurity and clarity in one of the definitions in the Wikipedia definition, and we use this metaphor all the time, this expression all the time. The same in Spanish, me dejó ver sus intenciones. He let me see his intentions is exactly the same. But not only in written, we have all these names. This is from a business that teaches you how to be clear, how to be a good communicator. So apparently, these crystal clear communications, and if you see, and I want you to pay attention also to the drawings and to the images, is that make it clear, okay? I want to teach you, or they want to teach you to speak in a clear and direct way. But also you have all these, especially with the COVID, these ideas of these cartoons or pictures, people actually blinding themselves with all these masks in a way of saying that they don't know, they don't want to know, what the situation in these cases is about. So they don't seem to be too difficult to understand. Of course, I'm not saying you have to be really talented actually to come up with all these, nice and little pieces of art, but we normal people can understand what they mean very, very easily. The same happens with some other, many other examples, and this is another one that I like very much. Okay, this contrast between hot or warmth and cold. I don't think we need too much time to understand that anything that has to do with affection and to feeling good is related to this warmth sensation. And of course, again, and this is at the Amsterdam Schiphol airport, a warm welcome. This is what you see when the doors open, okay? And of course, you can also distinguish between this cold calling and warm calling in cases when they are selling you something on the phone in this case. And we use these metaphors, and can tell you that these are normal metaphors, not only in the words cold and warm, but also in these cases, in these conventionalized colors that represent warmth and coldness. Okay, so after all, one of the things that we can have, or we should bear in mind, that all these characteristics that we saw before in these dictionaries, they are okay, but they are not the whole story. And this is one of the main ideas I would like to tell you today, that metaphor may also be a matter of concepts, not just words, not just phrases, not just gestures, just then what it's underneath those linguistic means that we use to encode concepts. So that's why, that's what I mean when I'm saying that it's a matter of concepts. They are just to understand, not just stylistically. I mean, it's not to make a text more beautiful or more appealing. No, we use it all the time for many things. Sometimes, especially we talk about emotions, for example, as we saw before, might be the only way or one of the few ways we have to talk about emotions. But for example, in the first example, for understanding or cognition, we have many ways to talk about it, but we also have metaphorical ways to talk about it. We will also see that this is not just based on physical or functional similarity. In fact, metaphors are based on what I like to call perceived similarity. It doesn't exist in reality, but we are clever enough, let's say that, and we have imagination as one of our first or one of cognitive abilities. We are able to establish different analogies that doesn't exist in the real world, and this is what metaphor is about. They can be produced and understand without effort. That doesn't mean that if you read some metaphors in a specific context, you don't need to, maybe know more about that context, or maybe know about, how those metaphors are. But the examples that I just showed you, I don't think you need a lot of time to understand them. And this is another big issue, especially for one of the topics in this talk about second language acquisition. They just used by ordinary people in every day, daily, all the time. Okay, and I guess it's just because metaphors are related to cognition, and they are very important tools for thought and reasoning. So in this talk, apart from this very quick introduction about what metaphor is traditionally thought and what I think and we think that metaphor could also be, in this talk, I will just touch on some key issues in metaphor from a cross-linguistic perspective, from conceptual metaphor theory. And then I will just show you a quick overview of metaphor in Spanish, and beware, this is a quick overview. You'll see later, and I hope that after this talk, you will see that metaphor is used for rhetorical purposes and used by artists, but also used in everyday life. Okay, so let's start with a quick overview of what a conceptual metaphor is. I organize this first part around key issues that there might be others, but these are the ones that whenever I have to talk about metaphor, I always select them. Okay, and these are the questions that I will develop in a minute. The first one, what are conceptual metaphors? Beware that we are talking about Lakoff and Johnson's originally proposed theory of conceptual metaphor. And if you work in metaphor in general, there are many other views, but I'm going to focus just on this one, on conceptual metaphor theory. The second issue I want to touch on will be how conceptual metaphors are encoded. That is, what linguistic means we use to encode metaphors. Then I will go on with just two ways of just distinguishing between different metaphors. And then I will go on to talk about what these metaphors are based on. Why? Because I just said that we are talking about concepts. So, and about these analogies, between things that have nothing to do with each other. So we need to sort of prove that actually these relations or these mappings, as we will call later on, actually work. And then we will go on to, if are there any metaphors are good for anything else beyond poetry and literature. And finally, in this section, I will just present you, some concepts about the ubiquity of metaphor, not just in different contexts, but also by different speakers. So let's start with the first one. Okay, in conceptual metaphor theory, one of the key questions, of the key issues, or the key ideas is that metaphors are cognition. And be careful because I'm talking about conceptual metaphor, CM, okay? What does it mean? That you have one semantic domain that is conceptualized in terms of another conceptual domain, okay? And here, conceptual domain, it's a covered term, let's say that, for anything that has to do with the knowledge and experience that we have as speakers of different languages, okay? And it's important to know that all these conceptual domains, which in cognitive linguistics are called in different ways, okay, from frames to conceptual domains, there are many different terms, let's say that, but the whole idea is that this is an organized and coherent experience and knowledge structure. Okay, and this is important. What happens in conceptual metaphor? That we establish different mappings, and this is the word that we use in this theory, mappings between a source domain and a target domain. Okay, so in a way, the source domain is the one that conceptual domain that gives you all this knowledge that you actually use in order to talk to a different domain, which is the target domain. Okay. So, for instance, in the two examples that we saw before, in the case of this warmth, there are two domains. One is warmth and affection, and the metaphor that we create is affection is warmth. In cognitive linguistics, we use these capital letters or the small caps to write conceptual metaphors, and this is important, okay, because we have to distinguish between conceptual metaphor and the way we encode conceptual metaphors, which is the next point, at least in this theory. Okay, and in the case of of Trump and this, without seeing anything, this is another very common metaphor where you use vision. All we know, all our experience about how we perceive with our eyes, and then we relate it to knowledge, different types of knowledge. In this case, would be understanding and seeing. Okay, so this is more or less what happens in conceptual metaphor. Okay, in cognitive linguistics, and for me, this is a key issue and a key element, let's say that, in this theory, a very useful one. You see later why I'm saying that. The conceptual metaphor, the concepts, what we saw, those mappings between source and target domains, are different from metaphorical expressions. Okay, metaphorical expressions are multimodal linguistic expressions, and they are used to encode conceptual metaphors. And there are two different things. We have to keep them apart. They are both very important, but they are different. And sometimes I always insist on this, because in many other related, let's say that, metaphor approaches, they don't distinguish that much between, or as good or as well as we do in this theory, okay, between metaphorical expressions and conceptual metaphors. So metaphors are different things, okay? And also, I like to stress on this multimodal. You already saw some examples, linguistic examples and oral examples, but language is multimodal, and metaphors as well should be multimodal. So although many of the examples I'm going to use today are just the oral examples, you have to just pay attention to my gestures. I just a lot, like this one. So pay attention to gestures as well, because they are as important as the oral expressions are, the same as language is. Okay, so for example, we already seen this calor humano, no, this human warmth, but we already saw that image here, like clearing, like the way, to make communication better, let's say that, more understandable. And then we also saw, and that's why I told you to pay attention in these cases to the colors, okay, to the warm colors and the cold colors, which represents in this case a different way of, selling strategies, right? Why I said, and this is the first thing I said about this, is like that this is very important, and I think it's, I call it's a super deal if you're working within this cognitive linguistics, theory, this conceptual metaphor theory. Well, because metaphorical expressions are language specific, okay, but conceptual metaphors are cross-linguistic. Two things about this language specific and cross-linguistic. I'm not saying they are universal. I, as a linguist and a typologist, I don't like very much the term universal, because there are so many, 7,000, languages in the world. To say that they are universal is a little pretentious, especially if we only based our data on a bunch, on a couple, like in this talk, on a bunch of languages. But they could be pervasive in many languages, okay? But this is the super deal about separating, metaphorical expressions on the one hand and conceptual metaphors on the other. Well, why? Because you've seen this example, okay? We have these two expressions. One is in English and the other one is in Spanish, crystal clear. In Spanish, we could say cristalino, which is exactly the same. But if you look at a corpus, It is okay, but I think we use, especially in European peninsular Spanish, we use más claro que el agua, or más claro agua. Okay, so imagine it's exactly the same metaphor, vision and knowledge, or understanding and seeing, but the expression, it doesn't have to be the same. We don't have to say es claro cristalino, oh, claro cristal. We don't have to say that, but it works. Because in this case, we find exactly the same metaphor, but different expression across languages. And why I think this is also important, because if you are interested in the same language and all these varieties, you might also find cases like this one. This más claro que el agua, it's, I think it's more like a general expression, but the one that you have on your left, más claro, échale agua, it's a dialectal expression, and this is used in Argentina, okay? In Peninsular Spanish, I don't use that kind of expression. It doesn't matter, okay? What matters here is that the expression is different across varieties as well, but the metaphor, the same metaphor remains. And this opens up, you know, a whole new world, or it opened up, because the idea is not new anymore, in teaching, in translation, and in many other cases where you have to deal with different examples. Okay, with different languages. Okay, so metaphor is not dead, and metaphor is not difficult. You just have to find the right expressions in order to communicate the same ideas. Okay, so the third point was this type of metaphors, and the main idea, I guess, is just for you to know that there are not metaphors. All these conceptual metaphors are not the same. There are many different types of conceptual metaphors, and if you just consult different sources, different handbooks, or different, you know, texts about metaphors, you will find a list of different types of metaphors. Here, instead of just giving you an overview of all these image metaphors or spatial metaphors or all these, let's call, well-known types of metaphors, I'm going to focus on two, more than types, I guess, two characteristics that I think they are very important when you work with metaphors from a cross-linguistic perspective. And there are these two criteria. One is the distribution. I will explain in a minute, you know, when they are used, what they are used for, how frequent, in a way, they are used in a given language, and conventionality. Okay, those are the two issues that I would like to focus on today. Okay, distribution, what I mean by this distribution is just how frequent and pervasive that metaphor is in a language. Okay, and when I'm saying metaphor, I'm talking about both issues, conceptual metaphor and the conceptual expressions. This is important, especially when you work and compare, or you work with different languages, because it is different. I mean, one thing is that you find one example of that metaphor in a language, and another thing is that speakers use that type of conceptual metaphor all the time. Okay, this is different, and sometimes the literature on metaphor and conceptual metaphor has actually overlooked a little bit this distribution, as I call it. Okay, so it's different, the existence and the success of that metaphor. Okay, in fact, at the beginning, now I think we have overcome, you know, with all the studies on corpus linguistics and metaphor. But at the beginning, it was very common, you see, to find in different works on metaphor lists, interminable. I mean, and non-stopping sort of lists of different metaphors that you can find in a language. This is okay from descriptive purposes, but if we don't know how they are used, if we don't know what they are used for, they might just, you know, they are useful, but not that useful. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. This is from my own work, and this is just a little corpus, very, very little corpus, only 100 examples, which is nothing if you do corpus linguistics. But I would like to show you that existence is not the same as being very frequent. Okay, understanding is seeing is not just one of my favorite metaphors. It's also one of the most popular metaphors in cognitive linguistics. It's one of those metaphors that sometimes some researchers actually say that they are universal. They are not. It's not, and I can tell you that already. But it's very, you know, common. So one of the things that you say in Spanish, this is the comparison between English and Spanish in a corpus studies, in a very small corpus study, you do find the examples, metaphorical examples that encode this understanding is in metaphor. But that doesn't mean that in Spanish speakers use this metaphor as frequent as English speakers in this case too. Okay, in this very short study, you see here, understanding is seen is one of the most common, only 100 examples, but most common examples or metaphors. But you see that it's not exactly the same in English and in Spanish. Okay, in English it's more pervasive, and this is something that we have to bear in mind when we deal with metaphors across languages. In fact, and this is a study Wiberg did a long time ago. He compared Swedish and English in different texts, the translations, and what we found was that in Swedish, I see, you see, kind of expression that we use in English. I see, oh, you see, that kind of usage. It's common, but that Swedish speakers, when they translated, this is a translation, when it was translated, they prefer to say yes, so, or understand, rather than to use the verb see. In Spanish, it's exactly the same. I mean, I can say if I was giving the talk in Spanish, I could say, yeah, I see. You see, I could use those things. But if I say all the time, ves, veo, that wouldn't be that natural. Okay. First of all, because in Spanish, I have to say, ya veo. You have to use this particle before. And because we don't use it, okay, in the same way or as frequent as English speakers might use it. So this is what I call distribution. And this is something very important to bear in mind, that not all metaphors are used in the same way. And the other one that is very interesting, especially from a second language acquisition perspective, is this distinction between conventional and novel and creative. Okay, and I'm going to give you another of my favorite examples. This is quite recent, actually, but I just fell in love with this example about glitter. Okay, glitter usually is related, and I think it works in both in English and also in Spanish. It's always related to something really shiny and good, okay, and happy. I don't know, because maybe we use it to give, some brightness to our, to our work, or just because, we put something that is kind of glittering in order to make it more, sparkling and happy. Unless for me, it's more like that. Okay. And in fact, you can have usage, like her speech was brilliant in the case of this, sort of a sparkling, sort of good. And here, and this is in Spanish, this is a new sort of term, really, which is, it's all this sparkling effect. Okay, and if you put really in your life will be much better. Okay, and you could do it physically on your clothes, for example, as the tweet that you have there, or just in life. Okay, but what happens, and this is also from the COVID and the Refrain COVID initiative that we had, and some of the studies that we've done about the language of the pandemic. What is interesting about these examples is that they should use glitter in a totally opposite way to what I just said. Okay, instead of being something positive and good and happy, they actually select, and this is important, they select some of the properties that glitter has in order to talk about how, it is very difficult to, or it was, I don't know, I want to talk about this in the past, because this is from last year. It's actually very difficult to get rid of the COVID or the coronavirus, and also you don't know when you will be infected. This is the idea. So what they did here, they changed the valence of this metaphor, and instead of selecting all this glittering effect and the happiness effect, they selected another main characteristic of glitter. And this is if you work with glitter, if you touch glitter, maybe you clean everything up, but then afterwards it will just stay there. And it doesn't matter how long you will clean or how much you will clean, glitter will be there. So that kind of negative characteristic of glitter is used here with all these negative valence. This is quite a creative example, or a new creative use or if you want a selection of a characteristic that it was not used before when you use the domain of glitter in order to talk that something is actually bad, negative. Okay, but this difference, or this the differences between creativity or creative metaphors and conventionalized metaphors is just a matter of time and usage. Okay, so now you actually find, and this is also a recently published book for children, how to teach them, or how to teach them to cope with the whole coronavirus virus situation, and it's called The Glitter Bomb. So here a novel conventional usage of glitter, or what we know of the semantic domain of glitter, has already become, or is becoming, let's say that, conventional. So this is how metaphors in a way work. And what I like about this creativity and conventionality issue is that, be careful, the metaphor is always there. What becomes conventionalized is also the expression. Okay. Let's move on with another of the big questions, and this is the conceptual motivation. Why we are able, in a way, or to use or to establish these relationships between different domains that have nothing to do with each other. Okay, this is a key concept in cognitive linguistics, which is I use Johnson's definition for embodiment, and the idea is that all these mappings are grounded in our interaction with the world around us. Okay, and I always like to say that there are different experiential groundings, not just the sensory motor ones, the ones based in our body, in how we feel, in a way, the world, but also in our culture, and also sometimes this grounded. It's actually linguistic. It's how we deal with our own language, and I'm going to show you some examples. For the sensory motor expression, this is Morris up is one of the most common metaphors, where you have verticality, which is related to quantity. You can have many experiments, but here, I mean, in this case, you see that the more layers that you put, you go up and you have more quantity. So this is more or less what the sensory motor experience means. We also have this affection and warmth, and there are many actually examples from psychology where they have been working and investigating whether this relationship with temperature, in a way, with cold or warmth, has something to do or affects, in a way, our social relationships, interrelationships. And I always mention this study, which is a little bit old already, where the psychologists, what they did, I don't know if you know this experiment, before they ask about how they feel about different people, whether they were nice or not nice, they will give participants to a group of participants like a hot drink, I think it was hot coffee, to hold on their hands. And to the second group, they gave something cold, like iced coffee. After having that in their hands, then they went on to the experiment, and they have to see pictures of people, and they have to say what they feel about them on a scale of 0 to 10, I think. The funny thing is that for those, holding the hot drink, they were using more affective words, and the scale was, they judged people on the pictures as nicer, let's say that, Whereas for those actually holding this cold, ice cold drink, they were less empathetic when they have to describe those people. Okay, the same researchers did another another nice experiment, and in this case, they have this these little things that you put when you have some pain in your neck, and you can also have it hot and cold. And in this case, their idea was even greater, because they say that you have a present, and they ask them, what would you do with that present? Those holding, the cold part, they said, I would keep it to myself. Okay, that present. Whereas those holding the hot part, they would say, I would give it to a friend. So in a way, what they show, and we have to replicate this many, many times as the other experiments, but I think this experiment is cool actually, is that if you feel, warm, you are bound to be nicer than if you feel cold. Another issue here is what warmth and coldness is, because not everybody judges temperature in the same way. So if you are in a cold country, maybe temperatures are lower for warmth, and the other way around. So we also have to be careful about these general issues about warmth and affection. But here, another example, which is also very common, is to how we talk about time. Lots of literature has actually deal with this metaphor, and we relate it to space. And I want you to listen to this really small clip where he talks about future and past. And you have to listen and see the justice as well.
Republican candidate, the only way to lead America into the future is by tying yourself to the distant past. We'll be right back.
Okay, the sound I know is not that good, but if you saw him say, future is front and past is behind, okay? So now the question is it always the same for everybody? Well, the thing is that no, it's not, okay? We might use a space in different directions, but it doesn't have to be always front in the, future in the front and past in the back. Here, this is an experiment with Spanish speakers and Moroccans, like Arabic speakers. And what you see here is that for Moroccans, the past is in the front. So it's the other way around, okay? You have to ask yourself why, and this is based on the importance of traditionalism. This is what the authors mention about. But this is not exception. This is from a tweet Iraide sent a few days ago, where you see that depending on the culture, depending on the environment, depending on the language, the way you arrange time spatially, it's different. In Spanish and in English, we use this front and back for the future and the past. But in many other cultures, they use landmarks, like going up the hill, down the hill. They use the up and down. If you are a speaker of Mandarin, and if you are like the Moroccans were, they don't use it from left to right, but they use it the other way around. So we have to be careful, and this is the main lesson, that when we talk about the grounding on how these metaphors are motivated, when we have body, but we also have culture, and without that, we might not just do the same. Okay. Also, this is another example from the COVID pandemic. Heroes, okay, are used or were used or have been used to talk about all these, nurses and doctors. They were our heroes, okay, because they save us. It doesn't matter if you like this metaphor or not, if it has been used across, in many countries. But I want to show you two different heroes. One is from the NHS. This is a picture in London, actually, which is, Superman. And the other one is from a telephone company in Spain. They use Don Quixote. If you know how the hero, Superman, superpowers, are, and Don Quixote, which is just a dreamer, you see, even if you have the same concept, hero, the heroes that different cultures use might not be the same. Okay, so that's why culture is also important. And the last one about this is time is the space. And here I want you to show the linguistic experience that we also have here. And this is something that has been said in the literature, at least in linguistic literature, that orally, there are no expressions to measure time from left to right. That is on the horizontal axis, okay? But visually, in calendars, we are used to it. But also, and you see here another clip.
Well, that's the Jewish story. Exactly. From Genesis to Revelation. These are people who wrote the word of God that we honor and love under Egyptian oppression, Assyrian oppression, Babylonian oppression, Persian oppression, Greek oppression, Roman oppression. So that.
Okay. So what you see here is that orally, we might not have examples of these, left, right, or right, left, depending on if you are a Hebrew speaker or if you are a Spanish speaker. We might not have them, but they are there in our justice. And maybe, and this is one of the hypotheses about this explanation, is just because this is like a construct, okay? Like this is something that the way we actually physically arrange in calendars, and in timelines, time, especially, is also a way, for us to, or the way we have adopted to talk about or to gesture about time in a different way. Okay, right. So the things I've been just saying, that all these metaphors, for any metaphor, we have to be extremely careful when we talk about this universality. Time and space, and these different, examples that we saw in different cultures, is not just an exception. There are many metaphors that are supposed to be universal, but the minute you look at, outside European languages, you realize that they are not actually universal. What might be not universal, but really pervasive, is the relationship with these general conceptual domains. So understanding and seeing might not be universal. What might be actually quite often is cognition and perception. But as you see in this map, what type of perception is used depends on culture. Okay, right. So the other way, another question, another issue is that they are a powerful mechanism. I have already shown you this, trick or this priming that psychologists do when we talk about metaphor, and in this case, affection and warmth. But we also know, this is actually very recent research, that metaphors are emotional, and they are, when we perceive metaphorical meanings or figurative meanings, the amygdala activates, which is our center for emotions. But also, in some other studies, they show that our heart rate, when we deal, for example, here with sadness or sad metaphors, the heart rate decreases, whereas if we talk about anger, or translate in this case anger, happiness, and fear, our heart rate increases. So we don't have to, we should, bear in mind that the metaphors are related to or play with our emotions as well. And I also think that metaphors actually unveil what we really think. And this is another example that I usually actually ask people when I talk about metaphor. And this situation, okay, you have two colleagues, and they start to date, going out together, and a third person asks you about their relationship, and you have these three answers. Okay, they are fine. They don't even know the day they live in. They are fine. They are addicted to each other. They are fine. They fit nicely together. So the question is it the same? Do you think the same about the relationship? Do you judge exactly the same? Well, if you look at the first part, they are fine. And I have to read it, and intonation is very important. But if you read it, it's different. Okay. You have the same words. Okay. So these true conditions, are exactly the same. However, if you look at the description afterwards, it's not exactly the same, because we are using different metaphors in a way. One is madness, drugs, and puzzle. The question is, which is more negative or which is more positive? I don't know. Maybe this one. Whereas, in the other two, they seem to be, I used to be with them all the time, but now they are only together and I'm not with them anymore. Okay. So we have to be careful, because sometimes we can use them actually consciously, okay, and on purpose. But sometimes they just, so repetitiously in a way, just come out and reveal what we really, really think. This is and since I actually don't have too much time, I just realized, like 10 more minutes or something like that. Yeah. Okay. This is just preliminary results. If you took that little test that Sarah actually sent you, what we asked was just to read a small text about the pandemic. And then we ask you a few questions. We did 4 different tests using different metaphors. All these metaphors, like fire and control and war and machine and water, they were all used in press. And we wanted to know whether you realized, or whether the words that were used in this text actually make you think or make you judge that you can control the pandemic in a more effective way. The only results that we have so far, this is why this is a work on progress, are just from the boomer generation. This is Spanish, not English ones. And what we found is that for this age, it seems that they prefer word language in order to feel that they are, that the pandemic was under control. However, we also tested millennials, and what we found is just they don't like the word language in order to control. I don't know. This is an ongoing. We don't know the results, and actually we will be tweeting about the English test. So we will be very happy if you just spread that test that I passed you, because we need lots of subjects. But it seems that even without realizing, some metaphors make us, we prefer some metaphors to talk about certain things. And the important, the bottom line is that not all people, or in this case, generations, actually like or prefer the same type of metaphors to talk about the same issues. Okay, right. So the last question that is related to the second part of the talk, which I know I'm just running out of time, but it would be all I have to say in 5 minutes or so, is that everybody is metaphorical, okay? And this is in the literature, it's called Metaphorical Competence, but I want you to test, I don't know how many of you are Spanish speakers or how many of you learned or have learned Spanish as a second language, but I want to show you, and this is also ongoing research, a picture, and I want to tell you, or if you want to write on the chat, if you know what the name of the thing that turns up in the picture is called, okay? Like this one. Do you know how this is called in Spanish? Okay, before you answer it, because this is not the important question, the important question comes afterwards. This is called diente de ajo, which I don't think you say that in English, and this is the whole idea, okay? This tooth of garlic is just like garlic clove, okay? Right, but the important thing, and what I'm interested in, my team is interested about, is just why do you think it is called diente de ajo? And this is when I would like you to write a few answers if you want. We don't have much time to go over them, unfortunately, but we can actually talk about this in the question time. Okay, maybe if I show you this picture, diente de ajo, okay, yeah, because they are all in a row like this. Okay, in fact, this is used, and this is a real campaign, marketing campaign. Is just for a toothbrush, and also because of the garlic smell and all of that. But what I want you to pay attention to is this disposition of all these tooths of garlic, which for a Spanish speaker is okay. This is fine. This is what we call it, diente de ajo. Okay, right. The other one is exactly the same. I show you a picture. Do you know how this is called in Spanish? Well, we call it boca del metro, mouth of the ground, which in English, you don't say that, but you also use mouth of the cave. So it's a different case like the other one. You don't use it in this specific context, but you have the context, okay, of a mouth, of an opening, okay? And of course, why do you think it's called boca del metro? Because it swallows it, okay? When you go in, the tube actually eats you, okay, when you ingest food, okay? This is what is called metaphorical competence or figurative competence or metaphoric if you are only talking about L1 speakers. I think it's a very important issue because it's all the knowledge, all the skills, all the capacity that anybody, and when I'm saying anybody, I'm talking about, from kids to old people, from first language speakers to second language speakers. They have to produce, to understand metaphors in any language, and of course to acquire. And this is quite early on, and the literature on metaphor and acquisition of metaphorical meanings, I mean, it's quite, it's well established. And I always like to show this study, which is one of the first studies that Ana Piquer-Piris did with Spanish native speakers, kids, 5, 7, 9, and 11 years old, and they were learning English and all these clear sort of programs since very on. And when they were shown this picture, they were, asked, how do you call this? And of course, in Spanish, cabeza de escalera, head of the stairs, is not the expression that we use. In English, it is. But this is the most important thing because I'm interested in motivation. Why, they would say that. And if you read this 5-year-old answer, it's just, one of my favorites. Well, because it's the end of the stairs. It's at the top, at the top of the body. And this is, of course, an anthropomorphic sort of mapping, or, from our body, the top head, and this is the head of the stairs. So even, in a second language, quite early on, we can deal with metaphorical meanings. So the first conclusions about this conceptual metaphor are these. We have to be careful when working cross-linguistically. We have to distinguish metaphorical expressions, but also the distribution, what I mean frequency and pervasiveness of those metaphors and expressions. They are grounded and motivated, but body, culture, and linguistics. Yeah, and we have to be aware of all these similarities and differences across languages and varieties, not only of the conceptual metaphors, but also of the metaphorical expressions. And also because they are very powerful and they are available there, readily available there for every single person. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes, I will, this is on purpose, okay? This is the whole talk, in a way, the most important issues. But I would like to show you a few things about metaphors in Spanish, especially in second language, okay? And there are only 2 or 3 crucial ideas. There are many more. And this is, of course, my take on what I think is interesting, because I like that, the issue of motivation in mini motivation. There are 3 things that I would like to, to think about. This metaphorical competence, or metaphoric competence that everybody has, should become metaphorical awareness. And this is a book's term, okay? Everybody, and we should make, aware, especially when we deal with a second language, that, we are metaphorical beings. They are grounded and contextualized. And we also have to be aware about this, conceptual and cultural distance, or, closeness. And also, another important issue, if children actually acquire them easily and early on, we have to start teaching them early. And this is one of the main issues that, at least for Spanish as a second language, is still there to be done. Okay, why I'm saying this, because I think it's good, and this is all in the literature, for developing and enhancing some of the strategies that we already have and we can already use. Okay, if we make them think about all these motivations, they are better remembered. And the literature has many studies about how good we are at remember things that we actually store in a motivated way. Also because, you have all these different types of transferences, linguistic transference, conceptual transfer. If we actually make them aware of these, similarities in concepts, but differences or similarities as well in the expressions, all these L1 and L2 contrasts, then it would be, I don't know if it's easy, but at least, they will learn and develop different cognitive strategies to deal with in a second language. And also these compensating strategies. If we are able to be aware of these metaphors in a way, or how they work, maybe we have it a little bit easier to guess their meaning, but also to be able to explain. We might not use exactly the same grammatically correct expression in the second language, but we might make closer and we can be creative. But the important thing is that we will understand those metaphors and that we will produce those metaphors. And I'm going to show you just some examples, and these all come from Laura Suarez Campos' PhD thesis. As you see, the date is just recently defended. And she worked on anger, which is an emotion, and literature is full of references about anger metaphors. Bulgarian and Spanish speakers, L1 and L2, Spanish as an L2. And she did 2 tasks, production and comprehension, all written, okay? For the production, it was all this contextual, in context, all this story about Laura's story in different levels, you see here, and this is important. And in the comprehension one, it was a test, like a questionnaire. And speakers on all these levels have to say whether they understand or not what they mean. And here you have to bear in mind that in some cases they have the same metaphor but different expressions in these languages, and sometimes the metaphor was not actually used in the L1 Bulgarian language. Okay, results. Well, a couple of things. all these metaphors were used, and you see, and this is why it's in bold, quite early on. These are very popular ones, the ones that all the speakers actually produce about anger. Those are conventionalized expressions, metaphorical expressions for anger metaphors in Spanish. Okay, they might not be exactly the same, but they are okay. But what is interesting about is that they were all used, they were used in all levels, A2 and B1, okay, and B2, of course. But also there were some creative metaphorical expressions that they don't exist in Spanish, but we actually understand them. Okay, so for example, like había una tormenta de emoción. Bueno, pues tormentas de emoción, they are not in our souls, you know, all these storms, emotional storms, but we can understand them, and they are using as a container. But and also what we found is that these creative, usages of these metaphors were used in lower levels. So this is important. And in the case of comprehension, you see that some of those metaphors, those expressions, they were actually understood by all learners, including A1, which is a very low level, but they're already there. Okay, this is also important. They might not produce all these correct, grammatically correct expressions, but they are able to understand some of these expressions, especially this one, which is not used in Bulgarian. It's a novel expression for them. It doesn't exist in Bulgarian. Why? Well, maybe because the motivation is easy enough for them to, to establish those analogies between what happens when we are really angry, that you just, fume or whatever, and what happens in real life with all this boiling water on a pressurized container. Okay, if you want to know more, and this is what I'm saying, that this is just a very quick review of Spanish L2 metaphor. Let me suggest this overview, and this is a chapter in this book where we summarize more or less all the studies that have been done on metaphor in Spanish as a second language, and this until the publication that was last year. In general, and these are just what we found, is that there are already some materials, some studies on high intermediate levels about comprehension, and mostly in written tests. Okay, but there's still not much research on lower levels, on production and oral production, and things just that go beyond metaphor, like other like metonymies, for example. In teaching, and this is also this is all second language acquisition, but what happens when you go to the materials? Well, we do find, and this is only for Spanish, not for other languages, we do find examples, and here this is from C1, which is kind of higher up level. You do find examples in these books, like Football is Religion, and you have especially all these exercises on how to learn vocabulary. But then you also have all these explanations that go back to the traditional understanding of what metaphor is, rhetorical or literary devices, that is to say, not to be used. Okay. In lower levels, there is some metaphor. It's not that it's not there to teach the students. This is B1, which is kind of low intermediate. But what happens? We find metaphors always related to poems and literary texts. What happens, is that there is some metaphor there, especially in these books, teaching books, but mainly higher levels in C1, C2. They are used in very specific contexts, or they are either lists of metaphors, like idiomatic expressions to learn by heart. And if they are used in lower levels, the impression is that they are not used for everyday conversation, which is just not right. Okay. And what happens with these structures is that they, of course, they have this intuitive knowledge about metaphor, but they lack a specific training to how to teach metaphor or conceptual metaphor in a way. So the result is that, the power of metaphor, all the time that I spent, in the first 3/4 of an hour, is just underused, is missed, yeah, which is a pity. Okay, conclusions, and now this is the end. Okay, conceptual metaphor is a matter of cognition. It's grounded in our embodiment, which means both, the body, the culture, and the linguistic expressions. It's for everyone, every time, everywhere. And in the case of metaphorical competence, I think to be aware, this awareness for both, teachers and learners. It's important, and it should be applied to all levels from A1 to C2, and both in training and instruction. That is to say, we have to train teachers, but also, to teach or instruct them learners. And there is still a lot of do, at least in Spanish as a second language or Spanish as a first language. And for me, the first thing to do is just to thank my collaborators. Alberto and Laura were the ones, my co-authors in these papers, and Andrea is the one that prepared some of the tests. And the last thing that I have to do is just to thank you all for being here, for an hour already. So thank you very much. Now there are questions, but if you need to get in contact, this is my Twitter and my email. And these are the two books I based this talk about, which gives you like an overview. This is a handbook, okay? An overview of what is, cognitive linguistics in Spanish. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really fascinating.
It took a little much longer than I expected, but that always happens. Sorry. And thank you all for being there, still be there.
So I'd like to encourage everyone to, if you have any questions, either use the raise hand function or feel free to put something in the chat if you'd rather not speak it aloud. We're going to stop the recording just now. The Q&A session won't be part of that.